So it's 2020 and COVID-19 is still rummaging its way around the world. Should you still consider buying the Panasonic GH5? With the Panasonic S5, Pocket 4K and 6K, the A7III and EOS R5 now released, I wanted to review my old GH5 with the mindset that we're looking at it from a 2020 point of view. So background story, this is actually my second GH5. I originally had my first GH5, then I bought a GH5S. When I had the GH5S to complement the GH5, I figured I didn't really need two GH5s anymore. So I sold the GH5, and mind you, the resale on these are really good. I had no problem selling it whatsoever. But shortly after I sold my GH5, I ended up killing my GH5S, which is a story for another day. So I ended up being in the situation where I had no GH5s at all. Now, my primary focus is on stills photography, but I still wanted to have some video capabilities up my sleeve. So I bought another GH5 and this is it. Now I'm really glad that I had bought this GH5 again, because not long after I used it candidly on an actual photo shoot. The bonus footage that we got from it had actually more than paid for the camera itself. Now remember, we're looking at these cameras for the current price, and whilst the retail price on these GH5s haven't really gone down much, its real actual prices on major stores have come down a lot. So let's do some maths. You can get 3 GH5s for the price of one Canon EOS R5, or you can buy 2.7 GH5s for the price of one Sony A7S Mark III, or save $700 off the price of the new Panasonic S5. That S5, by the way, is very, very tasty. Now onto the camera. In case you didn't know, it has a flip screen, an excellent menu and touchscreen functionality. It does 4K 10-bit, has dual UHS 2 card slots. It'll do 4K 60p at 10-bit through its HDMI out onto a Ninja 5, and it has the most capable in-body stabilization I've ever used. It's that 10-bit video that makes these specs more impressive, even for 2020 standards, and it's made even more impressive by the fact that it could be had for $1,300. Now, there are other cameras at that price point, yes, but when you consider that 10-bit 4K, the competition is usually much more expensive, with the notable exception being the Blackmagic Pocket 4K and 6K. Now the GH5 is not regarded as a sexy camera that people lust for. That crown kind of goes to the EOS R5, the A7S Mark III, the Blackmagic Pocket cameras, but they found their way as being seen as a valuable tool for filmmakers who just need a camera that works. And the best way for me to describe this camera is that it feels like the Panasonic engineers are themselves filmmakers, because that's how good this camera is to use in the real world. Its prioritizing of its features and its compromises makes me feel like the Panasonic engineers themselves are filmmaking enthusiasts. I shot this super video under extremely tight conditions and was really happy with what it produced. We had barely an afternoon to get a huge amount of photography captured, including 2 billboards. There is no way in the world I could have factored in any time to capture any dedicated video. But the GH5 took a few inches of space in my bag, and I chucked it on my old Beholder DS1 gimbal and gave it to my digital operator to film some stuff over my shoulder whilst I was still shooting some rolling shots. Now, I don't even have to explain how impossible it is to capture any useful film when the shots are staged for stills photography rather than video. The way you would direct driving for stills composition is completely different and disadvantageous to video. So it was an absolute testament to the brilliant resourcefulness of my guy Jake Reeder, who did an awesome job operating a camera he had never touched before, as well as the brilliant GH5. It is the absolute definition of a run and gun type scenario. And that's what this camera is so good for. We didn't have time to rig the camera or monitor or anything that was too large and cumbersome to impede on my photography. So this Toyota Supra video is the literal encapsulation of what I think the Panasonic engineers had in mind for this camera. I'm convinced that had I had the Pocket 4K or a Red or an FS5, sure, I could have gotten better frames, but I also think I could have not gotten any frames at all. So despite being a 3-year-old plus camera, this thing is an absolute workhorse. Even by 2020 standards, this thing represents absolute value if you can buy it at a reasonable price. Now the Vlog additional cost is optional, but it's necessary for me because I love grading the living daylights out of my footage. But if you want to use it on a more run and gun scenario, you might do fine without it. So without a doubt, its greatest weakness is its Panasonic contrast detect autofocus system. This is not so much of an issue for me since I don't use it really as a vlogging camera. I've never needed any hasty autofocus in any of my work, stills or video, but your mileage may vary. One thing that does bug me, however, and this applies to the Pocket 4K as well, is that with Micro Four Thirds it's really difficult to get that nice shallow depth of field look. Many would also argue that Micro Four Thirds may be a dying lens mount, but if this is the kind of camera that you're looking at, it probably shouldn't concern you what lens mounts are going to be doing in 2023 and beyond. If full frame is really that important to you, you can pay the $700 premium for the S5, which appears to be a similar workhorse tool that the Panasonic engineers have made, except with full frame in mind. Panasonic have still not abandoned its Micro Four Thirds system. In fact, its new 10 to 35mm 1.7 lens is fantastic and makes an excellent alternative to the Sigma Art 18 to 35. I also have the Pocket 4K, which I'm shooting this with now, and I absolutely love the camera, but it's a completely different beast entirely. It's still a relatively run and gun friendly camera, but it also lacks that legendary GH5 in-body stabilization. And let me say that the difference of a few minutes to rig a camera up onto a gimbal can mean all the difference in the world on a shoot like this. I think the GH5 is perfect for those who need to record quality content without focusing too much on the technical aspects of filmmaking. Not everyone wants to spend their time dealing with rigging up cameras, or even gimbals for that matter. There are a lot of content creators out there who need to just be able to press record and focus on the content itself. They don't want to be obsessing with the tools. Having more tools can actually complicate the filmmaking process, which can be very detrimental to your focus on content. It's not like that for everyone, but it'll certainly be like that for some. So here's a simple trick. If your YouTube homepage is full of techie filmmaking videos, then the Pocket 4K is probably a more suitable camera for you. If, however, your YouTube homepage is more full of the content that you're actually filming and you want to focus more on your content rather than the actual process and the technical aspects of filmmaking, then I think the GH5 is still a perfect camera option for 2020. Another interesting thing to note is that my GH5 videos have been far more popular than my Pocket 4K ones. I can't fully explain why, but I hazard to think that the Pocket 4K creates that classic Blackmagic film look, which, as aesthetic as it may be, runs the risk of looking like every other Blackmagic filmmaker's footage. The GH5 has a look that's more close to my style of photography, which might be why people like the footage more. It goes to show that even when on paper, the specs might look amazing for a particular camera, that doesn't always necessarily translate to better videos.